the Grand Ole Opry stars. So he booked Elvis with acts, you know.
August 1977. Elvis Presley was barely cold in his grave when Vernon Presley discovered something that would shatter his world forever. His daughter-in-law Priscilla had already started making phone calls, not to comfort grieving family members, not to plan a proper memorial. She was calling lawyers, accountants, and business managers. Vernon couldn't believe what he was hearing through those Graceland walls. Priscilla was talking about turning their sacred family home into a tourist attraction. She wanted to open Elvis's private sanctuary to strangers who would pay money to walk through his son's bedroom, his personal spaces, his most intimate memories. This wasn't grief. This was business. When Vernon confronted Priscilla directly, her response sent him into a rage that friends say they'd never witnessed before. She looked him straight in the eye and told him that Elvis would have wanted Graceland to be shared with his fans, that it was what he would have chosen. Vernon knew better. He'd lived with Elvis. He'd watched his son retreat to Graceland when the world became too much. This was Elvis's escape, his haven, the one place where he could just be a man instead of a legend. And now, Priscilla wanted to sell tickets to that privacy. But here's what really broke Vernon's heart. He realized this wasn't a sudden decision made in grief. Priscilla had been planning this. She'd been studying the estate, learning about the finances, positioning herself for this moment. While Elvis was struggling with his demons, fighting his addictions, pouring his soul out on stage night after night, his own wife was calculating how to profit from his legacy. Vernon saw through her tears, through her public mourning, through her carefully crafted image as the devoted widow. What he discovered was a woman who had turned his son's death into her greatest business opportunity. The man who had protected Elvis his entire life suddenly realized he'd failed at the most crucial moment. He'd let a wolf into their family, and now that wolf was devouring everything Elvis had built. Vernon Presley was about to declare war on the woman he'd once welcomed as a daughter. What the public never knew was that Vernon Presley and Priscilla were locked in a brutal, behind-the-scenes battle from the moment Elvis died. While fans around the world mourned their king, a vicious family war was tearing apart everything. This woman who had divorced Elvis just 4 years earlier was now swooping in like a vulture to claim pieces of his empire. And Vernon was horrified to realize that legally she had every right to do it. The first major battle erupted over Elvis's music catalog. Priscilla wanted to sell licensing deals to companies that Vernon felt would cheapen Elvis's artistic legacy. She was talking about Elvis-themed restaurants, Elvis slot machines, Elvis everything. Vernon had watched his son pour his heart and soul into his music, and now his ex-wife wanted to turn those sacred songs into commercial jingles. When Vernon tried to block these deals, Priscilla played her ace card, Little Lisa Marie. She reminded Vernon that as Lisa Marie's mother, she was making decisions in her daughter's best financial interest. How could Vernon argue with a mother protecting her child's inheritance? But Vernon saw right through this manipulation. He knew Priscilla was using Lisa Marie as a shield for her own ambitions. The little girl was just 9 years old, completely unaware that her mother was reshaping her father's legacy into a business empire. The phone calls between Vernon and Priscilla became legendary among those who witnessed them. Vernon, usually a quiet, respectful man, would explode into screaming matches that could be heard throughout Graceland. He accused Priscilla of never truly loving Elvis, of seeing him only as a meal ticket from the very beginning. And Priscilla, she fired back with ammunition that cut Vernon to his core. She reminded him that he'd failed to protect Elvis from his drug addiction. She suggested that maybe if Vernon had been a better father, Elvis would still be alive. She knew exactly how to twist the knife in Vernon's deepest wound, his guilt over not saving his son. But the most devastating discovery came when Vernon found out that Priscilla had been secretly recording conversations with Elvis during their final years together. She had hours of tapes where Elvis, often under the influence of prescription drugs, made statements about his estate, his wishes, his fears. Priscilla was prepared to use her ex-husband's most vulnerable moments as legal ammunition in court. Vernon realized he wasn't just fighting for Elvis's legacy. He was fighting against a woman who had been building a case against his family for years. Every intimate conversation, every private moment, every weakness Elvis had ever shown her, she'd been cataloging it all as potential leverage. The breaking point came during a heated family meeting in Graceland's living room. Vernon accused Priscilla of never loving Elvis, of marrying him only for his fame and fortune. Priscilla's response was calculated and cruel. She looked Vernon in the eye and said that at least she'd tried to help Elvis when he was alive. In that moment, Vernon saw the real Priscilla, not the grieving ex-wife, not the concerned mother, but a cold, calculating woman who would use Elvis's death, his daughter's inheritance, and his family's grief as weapons in her quest for control. Vernon Presley had spent his life protecting Elvis from the world. Now he realized his greatest failure. He'd never protected Elvis from the woman who slept beside him. In his final interviews before his own death, Vernon Presley revealed accusations against Priscilla that were so shocking, so damaging, that most of them never made it to print. But those who heard Vernon's confessions knew they were listening to a broken father's last attempt to expose what he believed was the real truth about his son's destruction. Vernon claimed that Priscilla's affair with Mike Stone wasn't just infidelity, it was psychological warfare designed to break Elvis's spirit. According to Vernon, Priscilla deliberately flaunted the relationship, making sure Elvis knew about her betrayal in the most humiliating ways possible. She would come home. She even brought Mike Stone around Elvis's own circle of friends. But here's where Vernon's accusations became truly explosive. He claimed that Priscilla told Elvis she was leaving him, not because their marriage was broken, but because she'd found a real man who could satisfy her in ways were where Priscilla revealed her true nature. She demanded massive financial settlements, but more than that, she threatened to go public with Elvis's most private struggles. Vernon claimed she had detailed knowledge of Elvis's prescription drug use, his health problems, his most vulnerable moments, and she was prepared to expose all of it in court if he didn't meet her demands. Vernon said Elvis was terrified of public humiliation. The thought of his fans learning about his weaknesses, his dependencies, his personal failures, it was worse than death to him. So he gave Priscilla everything she wanted just to keep his secret safe. But Vernon's most damning accusation was that Priscilla continued this psychological manipulation even after their divorce. She would call Elvis late at night, sometimes pretending she wanted to reconcile, other times just to remind him of what he'd lost. Vernon claimed she would tell Elvis how much. These calls, according to Vernon, would send Elvis into devastating emotional spirals. He would binge on prescription drugs for days afterward, unable to cope with the emotional torture his ex-wife was inflicting. Vernon watched his son deteriorate after each of these conversations, and he begged Elvis to cut off all contact with Priscilla, except for matters involving Lisa Marie. But Elvis couldn't do it. Vernon believed that Priscilla had such psychological control over his son that Elvis was addicted to her cruelty. Even when she was destroying him, he kept going back for more punishment. Vernon's most heartbreaking revelation was about Elvis's final years. He claimed that Elvis's drug use escalated dramatically after each of Priscilla's psychological attacks. When she filed for divorce, Elvis's prescription drug consumption doubled. When she moved in with Mike Stone, it doubled again. When she started making public appearances with her new lover, Elvis began mixing different medications in dangerous combinations. According to Vernon, Priscilla knew exactly what she was doing to Elvis's mental state. She understood that her emotional manipulations were driving him deeper into addiction, and she used that knowledge as a weapon. When Elvis would threaten to reduce her financial support or limit her access to Lisa Marie, she would launch another psychological assault that would send him spiraling. Vernon claimed that in Elvis's final months that he might cut her out of his estate entirely, so she increased the frequency and intensity of her emotional manipulations to keep him too unstable to make rational, legal decisions. The most chilling accusation Vernon made was that Priscilla called Elvis just 3 days before his death. According to Vernon, Elvis was doing better, had been clean for several days, was talking about getting his life back together. Then Priscilla called, and whatever she said to him during that conversation sent Elvis into the final binge that killed him. Vernon never revealed what Priscilla said during that last phone call, but he was convinced that she knew exactly what effect her words would have on his son's fragile mental state. In Vernon's mind, Priscilla didn't just abandon Elvis, she systematically destroyed him, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but a broken man who died alone in his bathroom. These weren't just accusations born from grief. Vernon had witnessed years of this psychological torture, had seen how Priscilla's calculated cruelty was slowly killing his son, and he spent his final years consumed with rage that he hadn't been able to stop it. Vernon Presley's final battle with Priscilla became an all-out war for Elvis's soul, and Vernon's soul plans she'd been developing for years. The first major victory Priscilla claimed was Graceland itself. Vernon wanted to keep it as a private family home, a sacred space where Elvis's memory could be preserved with dignity. But Priscilla had done her homework. She knew the estate was hemorrhaging money, that the upkeep costs were astronomical, and that Vernon couldn't afford to maintain it without generating income. When Priscilla proposed opening Graceland to public tours, Vernon exploded. He accused her of wanting to turn his son's home into a carnival, a freak show where strangers would gawk at Elvis's personal belongings. But Priscilla had an answer for everything. She framed it as preserving Elvis's legacy, sharing his memory with the fans who loved him, ensuring that Lisa Marie would inherit something valuable rather than just debt. Vernon saw through every word. This wasn't about preservation, it was about profit. Priscilla was calculating how much money she could extract from Elvis's death. and she'd realized that his tragedy was worth more than his triumph ever was. The legal battles were brutal and expensive. Vernon hired lawyers to fight Priscilla's commercialization plans, but she had better attorneys, more money, and most importantly, she had Lisa Marie. Every time Vernon tried to block one of her schemes, Priscilla would invoke her daughter's best interests. She was making these decisions as Lisa Marie's guardian, protecting her child's financial future. Vernon knew it was manipulation, but the courts didn't care about his suspicions. They cared about legal documents, financial projections, and what appeared to be in the best interests of a minor child. Priscilla was brilliant at making her greed look like maternal responsibility. The breaking point came when Priscilla announced plans to license Elvis's name and image for commercial products. She wanted Elvis on lunchboxes, t-shirts, coffee mugs, anything that could generate revenue. Vernon was horrified. His son had been an artist, a revolutionary who changed music forever, and now his ex-wife wanted to turn him into a brand mascot. When Vernon tried to fight this in court, Priscilla's lawyers destroyed him. They painted him as a grieving old man who couldn't accept that times had changed, who was standing in the way of his granddaughter's financial security. They argued that Vernon's sentimental attachment to Elvis's memory was actually harmful to Lisa Marie's future. But Vernon's most devastating loss came when he realized that Priscilla was rewriting Elvis's story. In interviews, she began portraying herself as the long-suffering wife who had tried to save Elvis from his demons. She painted a picture of a woman who had loved unconditionally, but had been forced to leave for her own survival and her daughter's safety. Vernon watched in horror as the public bought this narrative completely. Priscilla became the tragic widow, the woman who had loved Elvis but couldn't save him. Meanwhile, Vernon's attempts to tell the truth about her manipulation and psychological warfare were dismissed as the bitter ramblings of a grieving father who needed someone to blame. The media loved Priscilla's version of events because it was cleaner, more palatable. A story about a flawed but loving woman who had tried to help her troubled husband was much easier to digest than Vernon's accusations of calculated psychological torture and financial exploitation. In his final interviews, Vernon's fury at Priscilla reached a boiling point. He warned that she was turning Elvis into a commodity, that future generations would know Elvis only as a commercial brand rather than as the revolutionary artist he had been. He predicted that Graceland would become a tourist trap, that Elvis's music would be cheapened by endless licensing deals, and that his son's real story would be buried under layers of profitable mythology. Vernon's most prophetic warning was about what would happen to Elvis's artistic legacy. He feared that Priscilla's commercialization would reduce Elvis to a caricature, the jumpsuit-wearing, drug-addled performer of his final years, rather than the young revolutionary who had changed music forever. Vernon saw that Priscilla was more interested in selling the tragedy than preserving the triumph. But perhaps Vernon's greatest heartbreak was realizing that he would die knowing that Priscilla had won. She had outmaneuvered him legally, financially, and in the court of public opinion. The woman he believed had systematically destroyed his son was now controlling his son's legacy, and there was nothing Vernon could do to stop her. In his final recorded interview, just months before his own death, Vernon's voice shook with rage and despair as he delivered his last warning about Priscilla. He said that future generations would discover the truth about what she had done to Elvis, but by then, it would be too late. The damage would be permanent, and Elvis's real story would be lost forever under the weight of her profitable lies. Vernon Presley died in 1979, just 2 years after Elvis, taking his secrets and his fury to the grave. But his warnings about Priscilla's transformation of Elvis into a commercial empire proved to be tragically accurate. Vernon Presley's fury at Priscilla wasn't just the grief of a heartbroken father. It was the desperate rage of a man who had watched his son be systematically destroyed by the woman who claimed to love him. From the moment Elvis died, Vernon saw Priscilla for what he believed she truly was, a calculating manipulator who had spent years positioning herself to profit from tragedy. Every accusation Vernon made, every warning he issued, every prediction about what Priscilla would do to Elvis's legacy has come to pass. Graceland became a tourist attraction. Elvis's image was licensed for countless commercial products. His story was rewritten to make Priscilla the sympathetic figure, while the real truth about their relationship was buried under layers of profitable mythology. But Vernon's most chilling revelation was that final phone call. The conversation between Priscilla and Elvis, just 3 days before his death, that sent him into the fatal spiral that killed him. What did she say to him during those final moments? What psychological weapon did she deploy that proved to be the killing blow? Vernon took that secret to his grave, but he left behind enough clues for those willing to look deeper. The pattern of psychological manipulation, the calculated timing of her attacks, the way she used Elvis's vulnerabilities against him. It all points to a woman who understood exactly how to destroy the man she once claimed to love. The truth about Elvis and Priscilla's relationship isn't the fairy tale romance the world wants to believe. It's a story of psychological warfare, financial exploitation, and a father's desperate attempt to protect his son's memory from the woman who had already taken everything else. Vernon Presley died knowing that he had failed in his most important mission, protecting Elvis from the greatest threat he ever faced. But his warnings echo through the decades, challenging us to look beyond the carefully crafted narrative and discover what really happened behind the gates of Graceland. What other secrets did Vernon reveal about Priscilla's true nature? What evidence did he leave behind about those final devastating conversations? The king's real story is darker, more complex, and more tragic than anyone ever imagined. Subscribe now to uncover the hidden truths that the Presley family never wanted you to know. Because the deeper you dig into Elvis's story, the more you realize that Vernon Presley's fury at Priscilla was completely justified. The woman who claimed to love Elvis may have been the very person who destroyed him.
They asked me to do it, and I was anxious to do some live appearances. You know, it'd been a long time since I've been on stage in front of anybody live. And I was anxious to do some live appearances, and I thought it'd be a good opportunity.
What I'm about to show you has been hidden for over 4 decades. These aren't your typical Elvis photographs. These are the images that powerful people spent millions trying to erase from history. And today, for the first time ever, you're going to see exactly what they've been desperately trying to keep buried. In 2019, a private collector's estate was being liquidated in Las Vegas. Hidden behind a false wall in the basement, investigators discovered something that sent shockwaves through the Elvis Presley estate. A metal lockbox containing over 200 photographs that were supposed to have been destroyed in 1978. The finder tried to auction them. Within 24 hours, he received a phone call that changed everything. The auction was canceled, the photos disappeared, but not before copies were made. Here's what they don't want you to know. When Elvis died in August 1977, there was a systematic effort to sanitize his image. Colonel Parker, working with estate lawyers, compiled what they called the cleanup list. Personal photographs, candid shots, private moments that didn't fit the carefully crafted public persona. The official story was that these materials were being preserved for the family. The truth? They were being eliminated. But someone on the inside was making copies. A member of Elvis's inner circle, whose identity we still don't know, was secretly duplicating the most sensitive photographs before they could be destroyed. This person created multiple sets and distributed them to trusted contacts with strict instructions. Keep them hidden. Never reveal their existence. Wait until the time is right. That time apparently never came. For over 40 years, these images sat in safety deposit boxes, private collections, and hidden vaults across the country. The people who possessed them were scared, and they had good reason to be. In 1983, a photographer in Memphis claimed he had unreleased Elvis materials. Within a week, his studio was broken into, Nothing else was stolen. Only the Elvis photographs were missing. In 1995, a collector in Nashville tried to authenticate some rare Elvis shots. 2 days later, he received an offer to buy his entire collection for 10 times its estimated value. When he refused, legal papers appeared alleging copyright infringement. He sold immediately. This wasn't coincidence. This was a pattern, a deliberate campaign to keep certain images from ever reaching the public. But why? What could possibly be so damaging about photographs that someone would spend decades and unlimited resources hunting them down? The answer lies in what these images actually show. We're not talking about unflattering angles or bad lighting. We're talking about photographs that completely contradict the official Elvis narrative, images that prove things were happening behind closed doors that would have destroyed his career and shattered the mythology that made him worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The photos I'm about to describe were part of that original collection. They show Elvis in situations and with people that his management spent enormous amounts of energy hiding from the public. Private meetings with individuals whose identities were scrubbed from all official records, moments captured when Elvis thought no cameras were rolling, evidence of relationships and activities that would have scandalized 1970s America. But here's where it gets really interesting. When digital technology made photo analysis possible, experts who examined these hidden images discovered something disturbing. Many of the official photographs released by the Elvis estate over the years had been altered. People removed from backgrounds, dates changed, entire scenes reconstructed to hide what really happened. The estate wasn't just suppressing new photos, they were actively rewriting history through the images they did release, creating a sanitized version of Elvis's life that bore little resemblance to reality. And they were so successful that even Elvis historians and biographers were working from corrupted information. Think about what this means. Everything you think you know about Elvis Presley's final years has been filtered through a system designed to hide the truth. The images you've seen, the stories you've been told, the timeline of events leading to his death, all of it carefully curated by people who had very specific reasons for keeping certain facts buried. But the suppression campaign had a fatal flaw. They couldn't account for every photograph, they couldn't track down every copy, and they certainly couldn't predict that decades later, someone would finally be brave enough to reveal what... The photos I'm going to show you next will change everything you thought you knew about the king of rock and roll. They reveal a man living a completely different life than the one his handlers wanted the world to see. And once you see them, you'll understand exactly why certain people have spent fortunes trying to keep them locked away forever. The first photograph I'm going to describe will destroy everything you thought you knew about Elvis Presley's final years. It was taken in 1975 at a private party in Las Vegas. Elvis is sitting alone in a corner booth, completely isolated from the celebration happening around him. His face tells a story that no official biography has ever dared to include. This isn't the confident, charismatic performer the world knew. This is a man who looks haunted. His eyes are vacant, staring into nothing. His famous smile is nowhere to be found. Instead, there's something that looks almost like terror. The photo was taken by a friend who later said Elvis had just received devastating news about his health. News that was kept secret from the public for decades. But that's just the beginning. The collection contains dozens of images that show Elvis in states his management team would have killed to suppress. Photos of him breaking down emotionally during private moments. Images capturing the severe weight fluctuations that were carefully hidden from his audiences. Pictures that reveal the extent of his dependency issues, which were far worse than anyone publicly acknowledged. One particularly shocking image shows Elvis at Graceland in 1976, surrounded by over a dozen prescription bottles. This wasn't medication for occasional pain relief. This was a pharmacy's worth of drugs that paint a picture of a man whose addiction had spiraled completely out of control. The estate always downplayed his substance issues, claiming they were medically necessary. These photos tell a very different story. The most devastating images, though, are the ones that show Elvis's psychological deterioration. There's a series of photographs from 1977 where you can literally watch him losing his grip on reality. In one, he's talking animatedly to someone who isn't there. In another, he appears to be having what looks like a panic attack backstage before a performance. These aren't artistic interpretations, these are clinical evidence of a man in severe psychological distress. But the estate's cover up went far beyond hiding Elvis's health problems. The suppressed photographs reveal relationships and activities that would have ended his career instantly if they'd become public in the 1970s. There are images of Elvis with known criminals, not just casual encounters, but private meetings that suggest ongoing business relationships with people involved in illegal activities. One photo shows Elvis at a private gathering with individuals who were later convicted of major federal crimes. Another captures him in what appears to be a heated argument with a man who was subsequently found dead under suspicious circumstances. These weren't random encounters. The frequency and intimacy of these meetings suggests Elvis was involved in activities that his wholesome image could never have survived. The financial pressure Elvis was under becomes clear when you see the suppressed photos from his final tours. Behind the scenes, he looks desperate. There are pictures of him arguing with Colonel Parker, images that show the strain of a man who realized he was trapped in a system that was destroying him. The official story always portrayed Elvis as eager to perform, grateful for his success. These photos show someone who felt like a prisoner in his own life. Even more shocking are the images that reveal how isolated Elvis had become from the people who claimed to care about him. Photo after photo shows him sitting alone while his entourage parties around him. The famous Memphis Mafia, supposedly his closest friends, appear in these shots as people who were essentially ignoring a man who was clearly falling apart right in front of them. The prescription drug situation was so severe that there are photographs showing Elvis unconscious in public settings while his handlers simply worked around him. They would position his body, arrange his clothes, and continue with scheduled activities while he was completely unresponsive. This wasn't occasional exhaustion. This was a pattern of behavior that shows how normalized his incapacitation had become. Perhaps the most heartbreaking images are the ones that show Elvis trying to connect with his daughter, Lisa Marie, during this period. You can see in his face that he knows something is terribly wrong, but he's powerless to change it. There's one photo where he's holding her, and the look in his eyes is pure desperation, like he's trying to memorize the moment because he suspects it might be one of his last. These photographs don't just contradict the official Elvis story.
Elvis trying to connect with his daughter Lisa Marie during this period, you can see in his face that he knows something is terribly wrong, but he's powerless to change it. There's one photo where he's holding her and the look in his eyes is pure desperation, like he's trying to memorize the moment because he suspects it might be one of his last. These photographs don't just contradict the official Elvis story, they completely obliterate it. They show a man who wasn't living the dream, but trapped in a nightmare that was killing him slowly and publicly while everyone around him pretended everything was fine. And the people who could have helped him were too busy profiting from his misery to intervene. The question isn't why these photos were suppressed. The question is how many people knew the truth and chose to stay silent while Elvis Presley died right in front of them. What I'm about to reveal will fundamentally change how you understand August 16, 1977. The suppressed photographs from Elvis's final 3 weeks don't just raise questions about his death. They provide evidence that suggests everything we've been told about that day is a carefully constructed lie. The first red flag appears in photos taken on July 26, 1977, exactly 3 weeks before Elvis supposedly died. He's meeting with 3 men in suits at Graceland. These aren't music industry executives or family friends. Facial recognition technology later identified 2 of them as federal agents. The third man's identity remains classified to this day. Why were federal agents having secret meetings with Elvis Presley just weeks before his death? The answer becomes clearer when you examine what Elvis was involved in during those final months. The suppressed photos reveal that Elvis had become a federal informant. He was providing information about organized crime figures he'd been photographed with earlier. But informants have a habit of dying when their usefulness expires or when they become liabilities. There's a photograph from August 1st showing Elvis in what appears to be a heated phone conversation. His face shows genuine fear. According to someone who was present, Elvis had just learned that his cover as an informant had been blown. The people he was informing on knew exactly who had been feeding information to the FBI. His life expectancy at that point was measured in days, not years. But here's where the conspiracy gets truly sinister. Instead of protecting their informant, the federal agents made a different choice. The photos from August 10th show another meeting at Graceland. This time, Elvis looks defeated, broken, like a man who's just been told there's no way out. What deal was struck in that room? What agreement was made that would allow Elvis to disappear rather than die? The official story claims Elvis spent his final day reading, playing racquetball, and relaxing at home. The suppressed photographs tell a completely different story. There are images of unusual activity at Graceland on August 15th and 16th. People coming and going who weren't part of Elvis's normal circle. Vehicles that don't belong to family or staff. Activity that suggests something was being orchestrated. Most damning of all is a photograph taken on the morning of August 16th that shows Elvis very much alive and alert, talking to someone outside the frame. The timestamp on this photo is 2:30 p.m. According to the official timeline, Elvis was already dead by then. Either the timestamp is wrong, or someone is lying about when Elvis Presley actually died. The medical examiner's report has always been suspicious. The cause of death kept changing. First, it was a heart attack, then it was drug overdose, then it was complications from multiple factors. But there's a photograph from the medical examiner's office that was never supposed to exist. It shows discrepancies in the body that suggest the autopsy was either performed on someone else or critical evidence was altered before the examination. Even more shocking is photographic evidence that suggests Elvis's funeral was staged with a different body. Enhanced analysis of the suppressed photos from the viewing shows facial features that don't match Elvis's bone structure. The nose is wrong, the chin is wrong. Even the hands visible in the casket appear to belong to someone else entirely. The people who organized this deception had unlimited resources and government backing. They could create new identities, arrange transportation, establish safe houses anywhere in the world. For someone like Elvis, who had served as a federal informant, this kind of protection program would have been routine, except it required convincing the world that Elvis Presley was dead. But the evidence suggests Elvis wasn't the only one who knew what was really happening. There are photographs from the funeral that show certain family members and close associates displaying no genuine grief. Their body language suggests they're acting rather than mourning, like they know something the rest of the world doesn't. The final piece of evidence comes from a photograph taken in 1981. A man who bears a striking resemblance to Elvis is captured in the background of a tourist photo in Hawaii. The facial recognition match is 94%. The FBI's response when questioned about this photo, they claimed it was classified for reasons of national security. Why would a photograph of a dead rock star be classified for national security reasons? Unless, of course, that rock star wasn't actually dead. Unless Elvis Presley's death was the greatest deception in entertainment history, orchestrated by the same government agencies that had used him as an informant. The evidence is all there, hidden in photographs that were never supposed to see the light of day. August 16th, 1977 wasn't the day Elvis died. It was the day Elvis Presley disappeared and someone else died in his place.
Here's what they don't want you to know. The cover-up didn't end in 1977. It's still happening today, right now, while you're watching this video. The Elvis Presley estate continues to spend millions of dollars every year suppressing information, buying silence, and eliminating evidence that contradicts their carefully crafted narrative. In 2016, a private investigator working on behalf of undisclosed clients filed a Freedom of Information Act request for FBI files related to Elvis Presley. The response was stunning. Over 600 pages of documents exist, but 80% of the content was redacted or classified. When pressed for justification, the FBI claimed that releasing the information would compromise ongoing investigations and endanger lives. Ongoing investigations? Lives in danger? For a man who supposedly died over 40 years ago? The most recent evidence comes from digital forensics experts who've been analyzing photographs and video footage from Elvis sightings over the past 4 decades. Using advanced facial recognition software and aging algorithms, they've identified over 200 potential matches
across 15 different countries. The FBI has quietly investigated every single one of these sightings, and in each case, the individuals in question have either disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances shortly after being identified. But it's not just government agencies keeping secrets. The Elvis estate has an entire department dedicated to what they euphemistically call legacy protection. This team employs former intelligence operatives, cybersecurity experts, and legal specialists whose job is to monitor the internet for sensitive Elvis-related content and eliminate it before it gains traction. They've successfully removed thousands of photographs, videos, and documents from public platforms using copyright claims and legal threats. In 2019, a former Graceland employee came forward with explosive allegations about secret areas of the mansion that tourists never see. He claimed there are rooms containing thousands of photographs and documents that prove Elvis survived 1977. Within 48 hours of his interview being posted online, the video was removed, the website was taken down, and the whistleblower vanished. His family received a settlement that came with a lifetime non-disclosure agreement. The financial incentive for maintaining the lie is staggering. The Elvis brand generates over $100 million annually. If the truth about his survival came out, it would destroy the estate's ownership claims, invalidate decades of licensing agreements, and open the door to massive lawsuits from fans who've been deceived for over 4 decades. The people profiting from Elvis's supposed death have literally billions of reasons to keep the truth buried. But the most damning evidence of an ongoing cover-up comes from recent developments in DNA technology. Multiple parties have requested permission to exhume Elvis's body for genetic testing that would definitively prove identity. Every single request has been denied, often within hours of being filed. If Elvis Presley is really buried at Graceland, why would anyone object to scientific verification? The answer is obvious. They can't allow DNA testing because it would prove that whoever is buried there isn't Elvis Presley. It would expose the greatest deception in entertainment history and destroy the mythology that keeps hundreds of millions of dollars flowing to people who've been lying to the world for decades. The truth is out there, locked away in classified files, hidden in secret rooms, and buried in legal agreements designed to silence anyone who gets too close. But every year, more evidence surfaces, more witnesses come forward, more questions are asked that the official guardians of Elvis's legacy can't answer. The cover-up is crumbling, and they know it. The only question is whether the truth will come out before the people responsible for hiding it take their secrets to the grave. The clock is ticking, and the lies are getting harder to maintain. The time has come to demand answers. The time has come to stop accepting the official story. The time has come to learn what really happened to Elvis Presley. Which shocking revelation hit you hardest? Drop your theories below about what they're still hiding, and let's expose this conspiracy together. Share this before it disappears.
Good evening. Elvis Presley died today. He was 42. Apparently it was a heart attack. He was found at his home in Memphis, not breathing. His road manager tried to revive him. He failed. A hospital tried to revive him. It failed.
It began quietly. Before sunrise at Graceland, the air was still, and the few men standing near the marble headstone could feel it. For decades, it had been untouchable, a sacred piece of American history. But that morning, the order was real. Elvis Presley's grave was to be opened. They said it was for preservation, routine inspection, nothing to worry about. But if you've lived long enough to know the way this world hides its truth, you understand nobody opens the king's grave without a reason. And deep down, even the men holding the papers knew this wasn't about maintenance. It was about mystery. Whispers spread before the sun even broke the horizon that there were sealed documents hidden in his coffin, that the Presley estate had received a private tip, that something inside that vault could change how we remember Elvis's final years. The press wasn't allowed within miles, but the story leaked anyway. Elvis's grave has been opened. 3 minutes later, word reached Memphis, and the world erupted. What they found inside wasn't bones or money or jewels. It was something else, something that would force even his closest friends to ask, had Elvis ever truly left us? And before we get there, before that discovery is revealed, we have to go back. Because what they uncovered in that grave began not in the ground, but in the days leading to August 16th, 1977. The days when the king himself started digging his own emotional grave long before his body followed. He was alone. Even when Graceland was full of people, it felt empty. The laughter that once poured out of those white-columned walls had faded into echoes of footsteps and locked doors. It wasn't the drugs or the fame or the tours that broke him. It was the silence. That kind of silence that follows you from room to room until even your reflection won't look you in the eye. Elvis was 42, but his soul carried a lifetime of noise. He would pace the hallways after midnight, clutching a book in one hand, mumbling verses from the Bible he kept by his bed. Some nights, he'd call old friends just to hear a familiar voice. Jerry Schilling, Red West, Charlie Hodge, anyone who'd still pick up. But even they could tell he wasn't really there anymore. His body was swelling. His shows were slipping. But when he walked on stage, fans still screamed like it was 1956. The difference was, Elvis wasn't screaming back. Behind the jumpsuit and rhinestones, his heart was tired. He had built a world so bright, it burned him alive inside it. The people around him, the colonel, the doctors, the so-called friends, all wanted a piece of what was left. And every time they took a little, Elvis smiled and said he was fine. He wasn't. He'd sit at his piano at 3 a.m. playing Unchained Melody until his fingers trembled. Sometimes he'd stop mid-song and whisper, "Lord, I'm so tired." It wasn't exhaustion, it was surrender. He knew something was ending, and it wasn't just a tour. Lisa Marie's photos were spread across his desk next to unopened letters from Priscilla. He read her name on the envelopes, but couldn't bring himself to open them. Too much had already been said. Too many words had been thrown like knives between love and guilt. There's a story one of his aides once told that the night before he died, Elvis wrote a note to himself on hotel stationery. It said, "I'm sick of being Elvis Presley." Whether that note was ever found again, no one knows. But the truth behind those words? Everyone felt it. Fame had given him everything except peace. He couldn't step outside without cameras, couldn't drive to church without bodyguards, couldn't say no to the colonel without a fight. Every choice was controlled, every breath scheduled. But even in that storm, he dreamed of freedom. He talked about it more often near the end, moving to a small town, growing a beard, living like a normal man again. His close friend Charlie once said, "He didn't want to die, he just wanted to disappear." And maybe that's what makes what happened next so haunting. Because Elvis didn't go quietly. The days leading up to his death were filled with restless energy, sudden bursts of faith, and late-night confessions that nobody quite understood. He'd quote scripture to the Memphis Mafia about redemption, about judgment, about rebirth. And then he'd laugh it off, say, "I'm just preaching, boys," before swallowing another handful of pills. One evening, he asked his cousin Billy Smith a strange question. "If I left everything behind, the house, the fans, the money, you think they'd still talk about me?" Billy said, "Elvis, they'd never stop," would echo through the family for years. Because the morning after he died, something was found inside his bedside drawer, an envelope sealed and labeled in his handwriting, to be opened only by family, after I'm gone. No one ever confirmed what was inside. Vernon Presley took it that night and never spoke of it again. But some say that envelope contained the reason Graceland's gates would one day open again, not for tourists, but for truth. And when workers broke the seal on that grave nearly half a century later, it wasn't curiosity that brought them there, it was a promise. A family promise tied to that final note, written by a man who knew his legend would outlive his life. He once told a friend, "They can bury my body, but they'll never bury my truth." And now, all these years later, the ground beneath Graceland was about to prove him right. The news of his death should have ended everything, but it didn't. It started something else, something darker. The morning of August 16th, 1977, should have been the day the world mourned the man who changed music. Instead, it became the day his story split in two, the legend they buried, and the truth they tried to hide. In the hours after Elvis was pronounced dead, chaos ruled Graceland. Phones rang off the hook. Strangers claiming to be friends pushed past the gates. Inside, the family was silent, confused. Hollowed out Vernon Presley, already frail, stumbled through the halls clutching paperwork and weeping. He kept saying, "Don't let them take him." But by the time the coroner arrived, it was already too late. The story had slipped into other hands. Hands that didn't care about the man, only the money. The official autopsy report was written in record time, too fast. Toxicology findings were sealed. Pages vanished. The cause of death kept changing, from heart failure to cardiac arrhythmia to undetermined. But those who were there that night knew it wasn't confusion, it was control. Colonel Tom Parker was already in motion. While the family sat in shock, Parker was on the phone with RCA executives, not about condolences, but about contracts. He ordered new merchandise, planned a memorial TV broadcast, and called for immediate album reissues to him. Elvis wasn't gone. He was now more profitable than ever. That was the Colonel's G negotiated. Vernon quietly signed every document pushed in front of him. Among them, one transfer stood out: ownership rights for posthumous releases. But there was something else buried in those papers, something Elvis had fought against for years. A clause giving the Colonel near total control over what the public was allowed to know about Elvis's death. It was the same tactic Parker had used during Elvis's life: silence through paperwork. Days later, the body was laid to rest at Forest Hill Cemetery. The world saw the funeral procession: white hearse, tears, thousands of fans singing hymns. What they didn't see was the quiet argument happening behind the mausoleum doors. Priscilla wanted privacy. Vernon wanted peace. The Colonel wanted control. He told the press the coffin was sealed for preservation. But inside the family, the rumor spread something wasn't right. One of the guards swore the coffin felt too light when it was moved. Another claimed the nameplate had been switched the night before. It should have ended there. But 2 weeks after the burial, someone broke into the cemetery. They said it was obsessed fans trying to steal the body. But local police never released the security tapes, and no arrests were ever confirmed. Instead, the Presley family made a sudden, unexplainable decision to exhume the body and move it permanently to Graceland. The official reason? To prevent further vandalism. The truth? No one outside that circle ever knew. But workers who helped with the transfer whispered that the inner casket was opened briefly before reburial, and what they saw didn't sit right. They said the face looked different. Some described it as wax-like, smooth, untouched by decay. Others said there were details missing, like scars they remembered from the real Elvis's hands. It became one of the earliest sparks of the Elvis is alive theory. But within the Presley estate, it created something even heavier: fear. Fear that the truth of what really happened that August morning might one day surface. Fear that the man they buried wasn't the same man who left the bathroom floor. Still, the world moved on. Graceland became a tourist site. Fans lined up for hours to touch the gates, take pictures, feel close to him. But the family silence only grew louder. In interviews, Priscilla would smile and say, "Elvis is at peace." Yet behind that practiced calm was a question she never answered. What did they really move to Graceland? Over time, even Lisa Marie asked. When she became old enough to read the old reports, she noticed how many signatures didn't match, how dates overlapped, how medical examiners disagreed on the simplest facts. She once told a friend that there were two LV, the man the world buried, and the one her father told her about in those final letters. Decades passed, and the questions only deepened. Why were parts of the autopsy sealed for 50 years? Why did Vernon burn dozens of his son's private journals the week before he died? And why did the family later request restricted access to the original burial vault? Those questions led to one inevitable moment: the reopening. The quiet, official-sounding reason made sense to no one who knew the Presley story. They said it was about preservation maintenance. But among those close to the estate, the whispers returned. A document had resurfaced, a letter, an envelope, something Elvis wrote that pointed not to his death, but to what came after. And when those rumors reached the family, there was only one way to know for sure. They had to open the ground beneath Graceland and face what had been buried there since 1977. It was early morning when they began. Quietly, without media, without fanfare. Just a handful of workers, estate representatives, and 2 security officials, all bound by written secrecy agreements. The official documents called it a structural examination. But those who were there said the tension felt nothing like routine maintenance. Graceland's grounds were sealed off for hours. A pale fog hung over the marble, and even the air seemed to hold its breath. When the concrete lid was lifted, a rush of cool air escaped, followed by silence so deep that no one dared to speak. Every sound felt sacred, every second a trespass. For nearly half a century, Elvis Presley's name had rested there, carved into stone, surrounded by eternal devotion. But now, beneath that name, the vault opened like a wound in time. The inner casket was carefully revealed, still encased in protective glass. Everything seemed untouched. Yet something was wrong. According to one technician later interviewed under anonymity, there was an unexpected object resting near the lower section of the vault. Not biological, not ornamental, but something that didn't belong. It was wrapped in aged fabric, the texture of parchment, sealed with a dark ribbon hardened by decades. Fans didn't turn away. They leaned in. The same people who once worshipped the king now felt something they hadn't before: empathy. He wasn't larger than life anymore. He was life-sized, fragile, human, and that made him eternal in a different way. Graceland became more than a museum. It became a mirror. Every visitor standing before his grave now wondered, what had fame cost him? What does it cost anyone who chases perfection until it swallows them whole? Even the estate, careful with its words, began shifting how it spoke of him. They started calling him the man who never stopped giving. But those letters showed he had given far more than anyone ever realized. Pieces of himself, traded for applause, until there was nothing left to give but truth. Pastor Bob Joyce once said, "If the world knew how deeply Elvis sought redemption, they'd see a different kind of miracle." And maybe that's what those pages represented. Not evidence of escape or scandal, but evidence of redemption, a confession that even the world's brightest light can burn out if it's never allowed to dim. After the letters surfaced, the Presley family quietly reinforced the vault. The grave was resealed with new stone, and the area was blessed by a local pastor at Lisa Marie's request. No cameras, no crowd, just family, prayer, and the faint echo of Peace in the Valley drifting from a portable speaker. And when they were done, someone placed a single note on the marble: "You were heard." Because in the end, that's all he'd ever wanted. To be heard not as a king, but as a man who once walked the same lonely roads we all do, looking for love, losing it, finding faith again, and trying to make sense of the noise in between. The grave didn't reveal a mystery. It revealed a message. That greatness doesn't protect you from pain. That fame doesn't free you from fear. And that sometimes the most shocking truth isn't what lies beneath the ground, but what was buried inside the heart. And maybe that's the real legacy of Elvis Presley. Not the records, not the jumpsuits, not the myth, but the reminder that even legends break quietly, praying someone will notice before it's too late. So when we hear his voice now, trembling, soulful, aching, maybe we're not listening to a man performing for the crowd. Maybe we're hearing the sound of someone finally setting himself free. Because if those letters taught us anything, it's that Elvis didn't die trying to escape his story. He died trying to reclaim it. And in that sense, he might have finally won. If this story made you see Elvis in a new light, share it. Because the truth about legends isn't found in tabloids or museums. It's found in the quiet corners of their hearts, where no camera ever reached. Do you believe Elvis truly found peace before he left this world? Or was he still searching, even in his final words? Tell us in the comments. Your thoughts might be the continuation of his story. And if you want more untold truths from the life, love, and legacy of Elvis Presley, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, we uncover the moments history forgot, the real emotions, the heartbreak, the hidden humanity behind the icon, because the more we listen, the closer we come to understanding the man who changed music forever, and whose truth still sings long after the stage went dark.